Reiterate, my name is Ash Patel. I'm a sales engineer here at Wallarm, and I'm excited to tell you about infrastructure discovery today. Our kind of like AWS native asset inventory, change tracking, and security posture tool. Before I jump in, just one thing to clarify here. Infrastructure discovery is a read-only tool. It does not require any write access, no agents, or it will never modify anything on your backend. The core issue that we are meant to address is AWS sprawl. Like that accounts can have thousand, like large organizations can have hundreds to thousands of individual accounts, and no one really knows what is going on in any of these. People are given admin access and then unlimited, without any restrictions to what they can spin up, where they can read, write, how they can store data, etc. And it creates every one of those accounts presents its own security boundary, and a boundary that admins and security practitioners have no real visibility into. So this is kind of like the problem that we are meant to address. The challenges of knowing what has changed in your AWS estate since last week or last month. Who created a resource and when? Where is this resource? What region, what availability, what VPC, what does it have the ability to connect to? And then lastly, what information do my auditors want to know about this, right? If I have an EC2 instance spun up that has the ability to attach to an EBS volume that has sensitive data on it, is that something that they would want to know about? And those are the types of things that that infrastructure discovery is meant to tell you. So again, we don't change anything. We list, we describe, and we get. From that information, we build a topological map and give you the ability to see a blast radius. So see, hey, this EC2 instance can connect to this S3 bucket or this EBS volume, and has access to like this part of the outside world. Drift level detection, right? Old value, new value, what changed, and by who. The CloudTrail app attribution, right? There are orphan resources, right? People spin things up and just forget about them. I'm probably as guilty as anybody. So now there's actually some accountability there. And then the last one is the Security Hub enrichment, being able to take findings in Security Hub and translate them into plain language with actionable insights, and say, so we can tell you that, hey, this is the security issue we're finding. This is the kind of like the implications of what could happen if it was exploited, and then lastly, prudent steps to address and mitigate it. And then lastly here, the before and after picture. Before you had infrastructure discovery, you were building things by hand. With infrastructure discovery, you have a scan that runs, every 10 minutes or according to a configured schedule. So you know that your inventory is always up to date. Change tracking, right? A granular view of old versus new, down to a resource level, and then knowing who exactly made those changes. Findings, Security Hub, placed into a graph mode, so you get a topological view of your entire estate. And then I'll skip down to the audit one, an inventory history, right? So this is not just a moment in time snapshot, but it is a historical log with attribution that is available on demand. So I know that I kind of breeze through those slides pretty quickly because I've been through them before, and I wanted to jump into the demo. So when after you deploy the infrastructure discovery, and there's two ways to deploy You can put in a secret and a key, and like that's kind of like the testing way to do it. If you're just going to trial it out for a couple of weeks, that's probably the path of least resistance. If you intend to run it in production, you probably want to deploy it as a IAM role. Once we have the account configured, we will instantly begin scanning and then give you this topological map. So we can see here, all of my uh, resources across the globe, from the US to APAC to EMEA. If we hover over these, we get a high level summary. If we drill down deeper, we can get more of a granular view of all the resources and the assets that are running. You can drill down here and segregate into various different regions and availability zones as you want. And then the top critical assets here are listed on the side. If we just click on one of them, we can see that it'll give us the high level details, like the appropriate CVEs, the various connections that are being made to this resource, and then lastly here the configuration. So this is the resource as AWS sees it, and this is how we see it as well when we are monitoring it for any change or drift. If we going into the details that we find here, if we take the top one here, which looks like it is a vulnerable Python library, we give you a complete context of what the vulnerability is, and then the remediation steps that you should take to address it. And then lastly here is a pictured blast radius. So from this particular resource, where exactly could an attacker jump to, or what other information or resources or sensitive data might they have access to? Now, this is things at a high level. If you want to drill down deeper into the actual asset inventory, I think that the tabular view here is a little bit easier to sort through. So suppose you wanted to say, I want to see all my EC2 instances that have any particular vulnerabilities. We can go in here and we can drill down into here where we're just looking at EC2 instances. We can click on one of my workers, and then as we did before, get a similar view of this particular resource. It's like the associated security findings and the blast radius. Now, we do help you prioritize your findings as well. And before I get to the findings, let's talk about where our findings come from. And the findings come from rules and policies. These are the built-in rules that I was referring to a moment ago. These are more or less how like basic security hygiene things that you should be addressing, right? That you probably shouldn't leave SSH or RDP open to the world, right? You probably want to implement some source IP rules around them to limit who can connect to them. We have a bunch out of the box, and if you want to create your own, then you have the ability to do so as well, using kind of like the standard CEL language here. For all of these, you can specify the service, the resource types, and then apply your own level of severity. Once a rule is created, it is then surfaced by a policy. So a policy is actually going to take your rule. You can select the custom rules that we have, or the ones that you create, and then you can tell us if you want to surface a finding out of it, and you can say, hey, for this particular production VPC, I want every finding to be of critical severity, because those are of the utmost importance. So this is how you would control, what we actually find, through the rules and the policies. And then things here are organized based on the findings here. A lot of these are kind of like, I think, CVEs related to EC2 instances that have out of date libraries. And hopefully, if you're running, you're keeping things up to date. And to kind of round things out here, we looked at assets, we looked at rules, we looked at policies. And then the last one here is the drift events. So really having a complete view of kind of like, the CRUD, right? So like the create, the update, and the delete activities in your AWS estate. Let's go drill down here into one and see what was updated. So we can see here that there was this bootstrap script looked like it was updated and it was modified at a certain time, but that's not telling me what exactly in here was changed. So let's try something in here, like related to the subnet. Okay, so we can see here that this particular subnet was updated, and the available IP address count was just decreased by one. We probably changed that just to generate a drift event. But whether you changed an IP address, you changed the amount of VPCs that you have, like in a particular account. Any change that you make is well documented and preserved in an immutable perspective. So your auditors always have a place to go back and see exactly who did what in your environment. And so from a high level, that is the Wallarm Infrastructure Discovery platform. Like at the top here, you get a summary view of your assets, broken down by types, your number of findings based on their severity, and the number of drift events. And then hopefully, after seeing this, you've realized that, you yourself may have some gaps or some deficiencies in your inventorying of your AWS estate. And you can go to the AWS marketplace and deploy infrastructure discovery for free. As Annette was saying a moment ago, there are a couple of ways to deploy it. There is a free trial, which is the full-fledged product with no restrictions except for time. And then there is also a free tier version, which gives you unlimited time, but it is more limited in scope for what it can do. So at this point, that concludes the demo. I will